Jed has got another question here. If you are printing to an RGB printer, that begs another question. Is there such a thing as an RGB printer? It's really about what is the interface data exactly, but more about that in a second. The point is, if you're printing to an RGB printer, would that change the preferred working space in programs that work with working spaces, Lightroom, Photoshop, and so on? Let's start with all of those questions, and I've prepared a few things. And let's have a look at this diagram that I call color managed workflow components that are typically found in contemporary workflows. Now, notice that in the Northern Hemisphere, I've listed input devices, film scanners, digital cameras. So we could be scanning film or prints up here, photographing prints or film over here, or scanning the world directly with our cameras. And then in the Southern Hemisphere are some output devices. There's our monitor. It's an output device. Our printers. Now, Jed, you've got a beautiful P900, known as a 906 down here in Australasia, and so forth. Let's use that as a case study. But we've also got our labs that we collaborate with, the professional printing labs around the world if we don't have a printer of that type or format for some works that we need to make. And then, of course, we have the traditional offset printing press or web offset printing of magazines for mass media. Now we don't call it pre-press anymore. We call it pre-media because we just don't go to press. We go on web pages, social media, merchandise, T-shirts, you name it. But that just is a symbol for that variety of other media above and beyond monitor distributions and fine art printing distributions. Now, right in the middle of my diagram, I've located our working color spaces, which is what Jed's asking about. Alternative working spaces to the sRGBs, ProPhoto RGBs, and so on that are bestowed by virtue of the software we work with. A classic example, let's say I've got my image in Lightroom. Now, of course, Lightroom forces me. I have no choice over this, unlike in Affinity Photo or Photoshop or 3D Look Creator, as to what working space I work in. It's hardwired in Lightroom. It's effectively the colorimetry of ProPhoto RGB. More about that in a second. But I'm in Lightroom, so I'm in the colorimetry of ProPhoto RGB. The reds, the greenest greens, the bluest blues are those of ProPhoto RGB, Kodak's 1996 archiving color space. The question now is, and this is the intro to Jed's question, what working color space do we need? Now, the International Color Consortium, the umpires of this world of ICC color management, which dominates our contemporary digital imaging workflows, don't actually describe working spaces. It's an invention of Adobe. In Photoshop, I'm going to go under the Edit menu, down to the misplaced color preferences called color settings. Why they're not with all of the other Photoshop preferences, don't get me started, but at least we've found them. And I open up those color preferences and let's see what it says. Now, I'm using the defaults as if I've just installed Photoshop. I'm using the North American General Purpose 2 defaults. Thankfully, these have been in place and stable for many years. I, of course, have my own color settings. And if I select those, I notice some things changed. But let's go back to our default and let's look at my preferred working space, sRGB or CMYK or gray color spaces. A lot of people, for interesting reasons, think this is a terrible color space because it's small and not perceptually uniform, and there's a whole lot of other things going wrong with it. But of course, it's the default for the web. But Jed is saying, now Les, what about Ectospace PS5 Joe Holmes, which Joe designed specifically for scanning Ektachrome film, because that is what he shot in mainly 5x4 transparencies, like Peter Dombrovskis, the great Tasmanian environmental activist, incredible landscape photographer. We've got so much to thank for these days, shooting onto Kodak transparency film. Perfectly characterized all the colors that are possible to capture in Ektachrome film. First, quick answer, Jed. If I'm scanning film, I'm saving, even color negative film, like our dear friend Bill Henson, that RGB data is being encoded, saved into Ectospace or from our point of view, Joe's Chrome Space 100 profiles, because this is Joseph Holmes at his best. Now, why? Because Joe told me to? Because he's a great man? Because he's the Ansel Adams of colour photography? No. There's a really good reason, and it gets back to this gamut mapping. Jed, the first answer is, do you prefer Joseph Holmes Ecto Space 5 over Adobe RGB, blah, blah, blah? If I'm scanning film, I put it into Ectospace, or in our case, because we've paid, Ectospace is free. Joe just gives it to the world out of his boundless generosity. We've paid for his Chrome Space variants. More about that in a second. So we used Chrome Space. Now let's make sense of this. So Jed, in the first instance, in my workflow, in my raw workflow, irrespective of what the software is we're working with, I'm processing my binary, raw data, my ones and zeros, into RGB data, and I have to make that decision there and then as to, what do I hold this data in? So we're still in color preferences. We're still talking about what's that working space? Should it be ProPhoto? Should it be Ectospace? Should it be one of Joe's digital camera spaces? Yeah. Should it be Adobe RGB? Should it be Apple RGB? The color space of a 13-inch Apple CRT monitor that hasn't been manufactured for 30 years, right? Or should it be sRGB? Now, let's jump back to that workflow diagram. Not that long ago, there was this notion in a lot of professional digital imaging workflows that we called early binding. Now, so for example, we'd shoot that 5x4 Ektachrome transparency, just like Joe, just like Peter Dombrovskis in Tasmania. And then we would scan it lovingly, precisely, with the best scanner we could get our hands on. And then we turn that scanned binary data into RGB data. We've got a house. And so Joe looked at the options and said, working spaces like sRGB are inadequate. Why? For example, let's go into here and open up Ectospace as a gamut. Oh, whoa. Now, to make sense of this, let me turn on sRGB, turn off Adobe RGB. So sRGB and Ectospace are now being visualized. I'm going to turn sRGB just for the sake of the illustration. I'm going to map it in black, not true color. Now let's spin this around. This is Ectospace. This, according to the great Joseph Holmes, captures all of the colors possible in Ektachrome film. Look at the blue tail here. Now, those of us who have worked with film now or in the past, if you look at the yellow Kodak box that the word Ektachrome is written on, it's written in indigo blue because Kodak is saying, Les, this film, you photograph a sunny day in Melbourne and it turns it into a thunderstorm. Unbelievable. He's even captured that. And of course, Kodachrome, the other great transparency film from Kodak, it excelled not in the blue gamut, but the red gamut. So the word Kodachrome was written in red on the yellow box. And of course, Fujifilm in Japan had the best magenta color coupler, produced the best, most separated, distinct greens compared to the Kodak color couplers, the chemistry of how this is turned into something we can see. And they excelled in the green, so they just didn't write the word Velvia in green. They painted the whole box green. Isn't this gorgeous? This is history personified. But hang on, where's sRGB? I better back off the opacity of the color gamut of Ektachrome to look at sRGB. And here, straight away, we're dealing with this problem. If I've loaded my camera with Ektachrome film in the past or now, I can possibly capture reds in the world that are 10, 20, 30% more red than the reddest red I can hold in sRGB. I can capture greens that are 10, 20, 30, 40% more green potentially than the greenest green I can hold in sRGB. And on it goes. So Joe, being Joseph Holmes, looked at this and he said, this is crazy. I'm not going to scan my beautiful film. And I'm talking about someone who rafts down the Colorado River for days at a time to create these extraordinary images. The incredible physical effort and Ansel Adams or Joseph Holmes has put into capturing the utter unbelievable magnificence of the landscapes of the Southwest of the United States. And he's then going to scan them on the finest scanning device ever made, only to truncate them into sRGB. No, thank you. Now, in the old days, with early binding, scanned film would have immediately been converted into a single destination space. For example, a CMYK printing profile for an offset press, hopefully on high quality type 1 or type 2 papers as defined in that industry. So straight away, that film has been compressed into colors, and only colors that can be printed on that printing press. That was called an early binding workflow. But today, the destination of that file, for example, Joe's or Peter Dombrovskis, the work I did for the National Library as when they acquired the great man's archive, all those 5x4 Ektachrome and Velvia transparencies, and we scanned so many of them, and the exhibition I put together on the restoration of all those files, and the book that was then published, and over 243, I actually finessed and edited and made into exhibition prints. Now, of course, we want them on a web page. We want them in the high quality art book that we made. We want them as fine art prints on gallery walls. The Australian Museum of Photography, the National Library's gallery in Canberra, these were displayed all over, not just put into collections. So we want a workflow that is late binding. In other words, we try and preserve everything the device is capable of capturing, such as saving our scanned data from film into Joseph Holmes Ectospace or Chrome Space 100, which Photoshop can now work with, so that we are preserving everything. Okay, then why don't I preserve them into ProPhoto? Because ProPhoto, the default colorimetry of Lightroom, there's the greenest green, the reddest red, the bluest blue. Why then don't I preserve them in ProPhoto? Let's repeat that process. There's Ectospace. Now I'm going to turn off sRGB, our default web space, and let me convert that into black. So now the black is Joseph Holmes Ectospace. And look at those indigo blues. The blues that Ektachrome was so often by connoisseurs of color photography chosen to represent. You would photograph all the lightning above Darwin on Ektachrome so that you've got more blues, more drama, more malevolence in those skies. So Joe says, you could save it in ProPhoto, but what if I have blues way out here? Dark, sonorous, even more saturated blues that the film is capable of capturing. And we're only talking nature photography here. We're not even talking plastics in organic colors, fluorescent colors. So I would scan my film as I have and save it into Ectospace or Chrome Space 100. But also, if we back off ProPhoto and there's Ectospace, you've got all of these areas that could hold data. We've got all of this bit depth that is doing nothing if you've scanned film, because there can't be any data here in film. That is the gamut boundary. So Joe, way back in 96, he developed these distinctions. Back then, even a lot of our scanners only scanned into 8 bits. So we needed to make use of every possible bit, every distinction available in those scans. No good wasting 10, 20, 30, 40% of our bit depth on data that doesn't exist. Now I'm scanning film, so I'm going, no way, I'm going to make my preferred working space large enough to save and preserve all my data and without compromise. Now, Jed, your second question, if you're printing to an RGB printer, would you change the preferred working space in Photoshop, Lightroom, or Capture One? You can't change it in Capture One, you can't change it in Lightroom, but you can change it in Photoshop. Right? How much does this have to do with that? You see what my argument is so far, and this is the spirit of the ICC color management model that dominates digital imaging to this day. Began in 1993, still dominates it 30 years later, is that no matter what my source is, we're working today with late binding workflows. So this is why Lightroom use effectively the colorimetry, the gamut of ProPhoto RGB. Kodak's 1996 archiving color space as the working color space. That's what they use. give us no choice over it, in fact. Benevolent dictatorship. We know better, Les. We're going to look after your data. Because then when I go to print, let's open up a print dialog box. We'll do a lot more of this tomorrow once we've got these basics in place. And I've got a decision now. I've got to talk to Photoshop about how color is going to be managed. I've got a choice as to how the image is sent to the printer, where color handling is referring to nothing more than this pathway. What are the rules by which we convert, and when and how do we convert from one color space, a working color space called ProPhoto RGB, to a destination color space, which in the case of my printer can be another RGB color space. We can send it RGB data and let the printer driver do the torturous conversion to CMYK inks, dots of ink on paper. More about this tomorrow. This is the print path we're talking about. And when it comes to color management, I'm going to ask my application, my Lightroom, my Capture One, my Photoshop, my Affinity Photo to do the color management, because then I get access to custom profiles and a set of instructions called perceptual. And what perceptual is meant to do is take colors that are out of the destination gamut and harmoniously map them into the destination gamut, which, in other words, the perceptual intent will take the reddest red in ProPhoto and map it to the reddest red that the printer can print. And all these other values, like a bellows on a technical camera, will be compressed together. They won't be undifferentiated color blobs, but no colors will also be colorimetrically accurate. Of course, we can map these in a multitude of different ways, which we will do tomorrow as part of this exercise. But for the moment, we've got all of the tools on the table that we need to work with. So, Jed, in terms of your printing question, because we can now work in a color depth much larger than the minimum 8 bits we need to create the illusion of continuous tonality in a digital image, a digital photograph, even though there's no such thing as continuous tonality in digital. That's the realm of film and of our everyday common sense of inhabiting time and space with agency. These are steps of brightness. So we need at least 8 bits so that we don't see those steps, those posterized steps, and her skin remains smooth and continuous as it really is. But now we can work in 16 bits. And even if you're working with a Nikon or a Sony that only chops the world up into 14 bits, if we save it in a 16-bit order, then we might have 2 slices which contain no data, no ones and zeros, but all 14 bits are preserved. And if we then save that in a color space as large as, at a minimum, ProPhoto, which of course the Lightrooms benevolently do on our behalf without us having to plead or beg with them, then of course the range of colors that our digital cameras can capture and most of the colors that film can capture can be safely housed. But there are also these other color spaces that are more specialized, like Ecto Space from Joseph Holmes, that are designed for very specific outcomes without compromise. We can talk a little bit more about that tomorrow. So if I'm printing to an Epson printer, a Canon printer, and printing to it as an RGB device, then that black box inside the printer driver does the conversion from RGB numbers to CMYK dots of ink of different colors, different sizes, variably placed on a page or a media, a canvas, whatever, so as to help hide the dottiness and once again create the illusion of continuousness. Now, that's the setup. So if I'm printing to an RGB printer, my prejudice, but also the intent of the ICC, the umpires of the world of color management, is to work in a large enough working space, scan into, preserve, archive, convert into, that is big enough that I'm not sacrificing any possible colors, not just colors in the file, but colors that could possibly be in the file, possibly captured by that device. And then David has asked, presumably profiles will drift a little as printheads age. The profiles don't drift, do they? Because that's a characterization of a set of conditions. This printer this print head, these nozzles, this ink, this dithering intent, the paper, the ink receptor coating, all of those factors. That's what changes. This is why camera profiles for our cameras are so good over time. This is why profiles for our scanners are so good over time. It's only when we have to replace the light source in a scanner that we tend to need to re-profile it. With our cameras, once we characterize our cameras, and we'll do all of this practically tomorrow, profile a camera, profile a printer, profile a scanner, and work with these tools with our gamut mappings and solving these real world problems like out of gamut colors. And I'll do that first thing tomorrow. So yes, these things move. Now, monitor profiles also shift a little bit as well. If you're on an ASO colorage, like I'm on a 319X here, the large 4K monitor, oh, beautiful, unbelievable. And it self-calibrates itself every 200 hours without me having to do anything. I can say, listen, I'm teaching, I'm consulting, wait until I finish, and so forth. It has good manners. But once set up, it recalibrates all of those settings, and we'll look at this in great detail tomorrow. But also, if you're not on an ASO, we need to look tomorrow at how you then do this when you don't have an ASO that automatically enables you to do this to the highest level of fidelity, match prints, match web pages, match iPads, and all manner of things. Monitors will drift a little bit over time. Now, our ASOs, our current ASOs for the last 10 or so years, they're temperature stabilized and whatnot. So this monitor literally from about 40 seconds from turning it on, it was 5.2 degrees C in the studio this morning here in chilly Melbourne, probably even colder where you are, David. Even then, it only took about 40 seconds for me to be able to trust what I'm seeing on the monitor, because the monitor is temperature balanced, temperature stabilized, is adjusting itself automatically. I don't get that on my MacBook Pro laptop or on our Office iMac computer. So I have to take other things into consideration, which we'll look at tomorrow. So there is a good sense of recalibrating a monitor at some interval. Question mark, at what interval? If, as I'll show you tomorrow, you date stamp your profiles, either as part of the top level of metadata, its name, or just allow the date to be embedded in the file as metadata at a lower level than the title, then you've got a record. So at RMIT, students would keep for practice recalibrate monitors over and over again. So we had an incredible record of these monitors. And visually, just looking at the image and swapping between two different monitor profiles made 2 months apart. If the image doesn't change, if the numbers don't change, then I know I don't have to recalibrate that monitor any more frequently than 2 months. However, but the point was, this is how simple it can be when you think about these things to manage the color. So monitors need to be reprofiled on a regular basis. Printers will also shift over time. So they need to be not necessarily reprofiled, but relinearized. We'll do that tomorrow. Cameras are really pretty stable devices, even when you drop them. Scanners are pretty stable devices. CMYK printing presses are all over the place. So you are constantly measuring page by page and recalibrating. But we're going to do this tomorrow, David. Hopefully that helps, because we've now got all the tools, the critical distinctions. We're looking at some real world problems, gamut mapping and so forth, but also beginning to look at the poetics of color and its enunciation. And therefore, we're in a position now to work on images together, to characterize devices together, and answer your other questions. Can I work with the default profiles that come with Capture One or Light, or I need to go to the extent of custom calibrating my camera? In cultural heritage, you most certainly do, if you want your workflow to be fast, furious, and efficient. But if you're a reportage, witness, documentary photographer, maybe not. And if you're a poetic photographer, maybe not at all, because you're editing your image so much from what was in front of the lens, poeticizing it, valorizing it, doing all sorts of eloquent engagement, giving it agency in a sense. Then it's so removed from what the reality was in front of the lens. You're not documenting something. You're not preserving something. Then it may be a moot point as to where you start. Although I still calibrate my cameras. So lots to talk about.